And it says it's good to go. All right.
Awesome. Welcome everyone to this episode of AI Insights. Today, we're talking about a swarm of AI. Now, when I first heard this term, I was thinking, we talked about positive and negatives about AI, but my first thought was, okay, this is going to be like a swarm of bees or wasps or something. Now I don't have to deal with one AI, Terminator. Now I got a swarm of them coming after me. So, this is an interesting topic because we've talked about how to use AI for work before or various tasks. And this means, well, how do I get multiple AI to work? So, Stephen Bowman, software expert, AI guru, is going to be walking us through this. What does a swarm mean, Stephen? I mean, first, and then what are the implications of it?
Great, great question. Welcome back. So you guys have probably, if you've seen any of my content when it comes to AI, whether it's on this podcast or in the Soft Tech channel or YouTube channel, whatever, you'll hear me bring up this large phrase. It's agentic architecture. So agent and architecture, or a draft, a plan, a strategy, a way to put everything together. And really, what Swarm is a fancy way, or actually, maybe agentic architecture is the fancy way of labeling a swarm. What I mean by that is Swarm is an experimental framework, meaning it's a piece of software that's out there that you can, software developers, or it'll eventually be, it's open source now, but it will eventually be um, open in a way that people who don't write code can use it. Um, it's designed to manage what they call networks of AI agents. So if we go backward in time just a little bit and we answer the question, what's an AI agent? Um, an AI agent is really just a piece of software that uses generative AI to produce a result. So we program it with something called instructions. We tell it what we want it to do. And it interacts and looks a lot like any chatbot that you've worked with in the past. ChatGPT, Anthropic from Claude from Anthropic, got that backward. Got something to talk about them today too, which I thought was really neat. Um, these agents just perform tasks. And if you think to yourself, and I know a lot of people I'm getting a lot of feedback from folks that are saying things like, yeah, it's great if I want one thing done. But when I ask it to perform this entire, string of items, this entire string of tasks, because my work doesn't involve just one task, it involves 7 in a row, it just kind of falls down. And that's where something like Swarm comes in. That's where something like agentic architecture comes in, where if you think about a business process, there's probably individual steps in that, we'll call it a workflow.
Mhm.
This workflow from beginning to end is 7 steps. And what Swarm and or agentic architecture brings to the table is the ability to create one actor, whether it's a human or whether it's an AI agent, in that sequential string of steps. And they can perform the task and then hand the results off to the next agent. That'll perform his task, its task, hand off to the next agent, and so on and so forth. So it's the ability to really use multiple agents together to get more and larger and more complex workflows and tasks accomplished.
Right. So I mean, we talked about the idea of using like a manager bot, and then we have all the worker bots type of thing. So is Swarm really a form of that manager bot, or is it something that enables them to connect together in the process that they weren't able to do before? I mean, because on the surface it sounds like, well, this is just a lot of one-off tasks, right? Each bot's got a task to do. It doesn't seem that complex on the surface.
So the big excuse me, the big challenge that we've run into and why we use an agentic architecture and where Swarm comes in is when you've got a 7-step workflow or when you've got a 77-step workflow, um, agentic architecture and swarm agents allow you to start it and then let go. They manage all of the aspects of that. So is it a manager bot? Is it a task specific bot? It's all of those things. And the beauty of agentic architecture, the beauty of something like Swarm, is that you identify your bots, your characters, you identify your actors in the workflow, and you say, you're going to manage this, and here's the resources you have to perform your work. What we've identified is that we can create a description of what each bot does, and we can give it a list of tasks in that description and hand that off to a manager bot, and it will assign work to the downstream bots. And
Okay.
that's where augmentation and automation, and that's what agentic architecture is all about. It's all about automation and augmentation and how we push that into the mainstream so that businesses can really start to leverage the power of generative AI. A lot of smaller businesses, right? A lot of solopreneurs and smaller shops, they're already reaping the benefits of AI because a lot of the tasks that they were doing manually, now they've got a GPT, now they've got an agent, now they've got a chat bot that can perform that action. Here's a website. Go and get me a bunch of information. Go summarize that website for me. Go do competitive analysis for me. Here's a bunch of questions about my business, or here's a bunch of answers to questions about my business. Go perform a SWOT analysis, right? Whatever the generalized or whatever the business task is, we can create agents to perform those operations based on our specifications, our instructions, and our description of what we want the output to be. And for most businesses, there is an amazing time savings right there, where the break happens between small and medium-sized businesses or larger. I think Swarm is something that can really bridge that gap. And that is taking generative AI out of the mindset of as one individual task that I'm going to go execute manually, and now starting to stringing it together, daisy chaining them together in that workflow and being able to automate an entire workflow. I think it's available right now. Everybody can do it right now. That's what Elite Digital Assistant does. That's what Innosoftec does. That's what my firm does. We string individual tasks together on a workflow for complete automation all day, all night. Everybody's got a different varying level of how they want that done. I personally believe that when medium and larger size businesses actually see the power that's available to them right now and they see it work the first time, I think they're going to be hooked because they're going to immediately see the ROI from it. And that for most medium and large businesses, they haven't seen that yet, I don't believe.
So 6 or 7 years ago, well, I mean, somewhere under 6, 8 years ago, the two hotspots for AI, I'll put AI in air quotes, right? Because everything is varied as to whether it's truly AI or not.
Sure.
This is before we got to like the GPTs over the last couple of years, large learning models and so on. The two hot spots back then, or hot areas, were machine learning and pattern recognition to a degree, visual, pattern
Sure.
recognition, but machine learning on one side. And then there was something called robotic process automation, or RPA. So is there much difference, Swarm versus RPA, or is it more of the fact that the Swarm, each of the tasks can be much more intelligent? I mean, what's the difference? Is this just kind of evolution of that?
Interesting question. So my mind actually goes back, go figure, I'm a software developer, but I actually see these agents in a larger environment. We'll call it a SMB or even an enterprise style environment. And I also think that this is what you're going to see with the large providers, people like Salesforce. Salesforce is all in on AI agents. I think there's going to be a lot of other companies that are going to do it as well. And that is, I think about it much more like really good software architecture or object-oriented application design from a standpoint of code reuse. So if we think about AI agents as software, and software is just code, whether we're writing it or a computer system is writing it, or AI is writing it, or something we haven't heard of or thought of or know of yet is writing it, it doesn't matter. I see that once you build a AI agent that can handle sending an email, then you can reuse that AI agent to send an email across all of the other instances in your enterprise that need an AI agent to send an email.
Right.
All you're doing is feeding it parameters. The highway is built, you just have to send different vehicles on it, right? And the information that you send in is what changes it from a sales email to a professional email to a company-wide email telling them about the Halloween party, whatever it is, right? I see platforms or frameworks like Swarm being at the center of that, where someone builds agents that are very task specific, but those task specific agents can be reused by other people across the enterprise or across the business in the future. And all they have to do, I'm Sally, you're Joe. Sally does not know that Joe created an email task specific bot. Sally just goes and asks the head chatbot in the enterprise, hey,
Right.
has anybody created an email bot yet? And it responds and says, oh yeah, Joe did. Here, this is how you access it. Here, let me ask you a couple of questions and I'll get your email out for you. That's the future. And that's what Swarm gives us the capability of. And if you go back just a couple of weeks and what we were talking about with Sam Altman's 5 layers to AGI,
Right.
AI agents are number 3. Swarm is just an implementation of AI agents. That's
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to talk about swarming before we move?
it.
Because I know, and I'll just make a side reference here. There's another area if people are interested to look into. Militaries around the world, especially the US, and some of the more technologically advanced ones are looking into AI swarms because they can replicate tasks, right? Whether I've got, like the US Air Force has got like a loyal wingman kind of concept where there's actually a drone that's AI enabled, but it flies with the human piloted, plane, just as if it was a wingman. And then there's other concepts, especially with drones, right? Of having swarms of drones, whether on the ground or in the air. So
I can
interesting.
see it. I can see it. I'm not as familiar, but I can definitely see it.
All right. What's next on today's hit parade?
There was this might be for a little bit larger businesses, but I think I think this message applies to everybody if you're thinking about AI. One of the original statements, if we go back to principles associated with getting good benefits out of AI, then the single most important item in getting great results out of generative AI is context. It's the data that you're providing it and the way that you're providing that data. So I read something that talked about how effective data management is the key to maximizing generative AI success. And that probably goes way over the head of most small to medium-sized businesses or smaller. What it specifically means is make sure you've got your data in your CRM and it's clean. Make sure that the data that you're passing it has been reviewed and looked at and is clean. So if you are going to build a GPT or a chatbot and it's going to answer FAQs about your website, read the FAQs, the questions and answers, and tweak them before you just give it to the chatbot. Because the chatbot is going to take certain liberties when it answers, but it's going to answer them based on what's in the data that you provide it. Context, the data in context that you provide it is critical, absolutely critical, paramount. There's lots of examples, and we'll talk about some more of these in the future. Even we'll be able to demo some more of these in the future. I got great news about this. But there's a lot of people who are concerned about the quality of their data. Maybe it's CRM data, maybe it's their proprietary information, the way that they handle certain problems, the way that they would answer a certain question. And this is why you don't see a Tony Robbins bot taking over the world yet. The reason why is because getting just their information, high quality information, organized that's up to date in one spot, so that it can then be used to generate the proper context to give to an LLM like an OpenAI or a Claude. One of the things that I think that you're going to see in the future, I'm working with this a bunch right now, are, we'll call them a baby LLM, a private LLM, where let's say, let's take Perry as an example. Perry's written a couple dozen books, or maybe a dozen books. He's got 20 years worth of newsletters. He's got the New Renaissance Forum that's full of questions and answers. We can take all of that information and put it into a private LLM. And then we ask that LLM questions to get context, proper context to answer the question, which then sends it to OpenAI that actually generates the response based on the context that we provided it. That's only possible if we're managing data correctly. So again, whether you're doing something small, like I'm going to generate 45 emails out of my CRM for the most, do like an RFM analysis. These are the people who are most likely to buy from me next. Let's get them a message and personalize it. Or whether it's something like, hey, I'm going to productize the sound of my voice, Tony Robbins, right? I'm going to put all my books and all my interviews and all my everything in it, and I'm going to give people access to it, and they can ask me questions, and I'm going to answer it as if I was there. That only happens if your data is clean, if your data is organized, and you're giving access to the proper data. That's really what effective data management comes down to.
Oh, I mean, so this is almost like a back to the future kind of thing, right? Because we've always talked about from the standpoint of software or data of any kind, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yes. Yes. Back to the Future is an excellent, yes. Yes, yes, yes. It's so funny. I was talking to somebody the other day, and the bottleneck when I was first starting out in technology were hard drives, right? So I originally, when I came into we'll call it IT, I started with databases, and databases were connected to disk arrays, and then disk arrays got turned into something called a SAN, and SANs are now what is referred to as the cloud, all of this other stuff. But that was the bottleneck. And it was getting data in and out quickly. And then there was this period, this 5 or 10 year period where I made a fair amount of money. I had a lot of business where people were paying me to set up systems just to capture data.
Right.
So they had this great big disk array, and we captured everything we possibly could. And then, of course, those same people called me back and said, now can you help me make sense of it? They had data, now they needed to manage it. The bottleneck at first was getting it in. Now the bottleneck is getting the proper data to an LLM and the computing power to crunch it, the computing power to find the patterns and to come back. You might have heard the stories. I don't know if it's true or not. I'm actually doing more research on it now. They said something like every single OpenAI query that you run costs a 16-ounce bottle of water.
Yeah, so I've heard some apocryphal stories about that, comparison of the amount of water, the amount of electricity, depending on well, they're using an average, right? Because some that are more complex could be more, but yeah, that would be interesting to know, because
Sure.
that is clearly a driver from both a power and a water perspective. Water, as for people who don't know, the reason why water is there is because many places, unless you're locating a data center in Iceland or northern Canada, which a lot of people do, by the way, to get the benefits of both geothermal energy, low cost electricity and cold, right, to cool because these computers that their AI is running on, the specialized architecture is very dense and it generates a lot of heat
Yep.
thus far. I mean, that's one of the breakthroughs they're working on is to figure out how to run this cooler. So we'll see. It may be that by the time that they figure that out, we'll get off the curve. But right now, yeah, I mean, any
So,
data center that goes up, you can usually tell a data center it looks like a large warehouse, except that it's got way more air conditioning units on top of it. Yeah, it's just like wall-to-wall air conditioning units usually, especially
yeah,
like here in Texas where I am. There's a lot of
yeah,
data centers around here, but you can always tell.
for sure. Just as the bottleneck was the ability to get data in and out of a hard drive as fast as possible and as reliably as possible 20 years ago, 25 years ago, um, they solved that bottleneck, right? Everything's on SSD now. Everything's in the cloud, everything's redundant. They will figure out how to solve the heat and energy usage and the computing requirements, the computing power requirements for AI. There's already people out there that are saying that they've had breakthroughs where they figured something out that cut, energy
Right,
usage by 90%, or
right.
there's no doubt in my mind that this is not going away. And because it's not going away, they're going to figure out a way to slash costs to make as much money off of it as possible. No, whole industries will spring up to solve these problems for sure.
Are springing up already, right?
Yeah, are already. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Moving on real fast. There's another one that caught my attention, and it says AI chatbots exploit invisible text to create covert communication channels. So the idea behind this is that
Wait a minute. So like, exploit invisible text? All right, how can it be invisible, right? So now we're gonna have to start off with just explaining that situation. Are we
sure
talking
thing,
like,
sure thing.
the
The,
old thing about what was it? I
sure.
can't even remember now. There's certain kinds of writing or invisible ink or things that would only show up under heat or lemon juice, right? And go back to the movie National Treasure. I mean, you can figure there's all that spy stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, sure. The secret decoder ring, right?
That's right, yeah.
um, so the technique, which is known as steganography, is using specific characters in Unicode, which AI models can interpret. This could open up a vulnerability in AI-driven platforms like Claude or Copilot or ChatGPT or things of that nature. I thought it was an interesting headline, not because of the idea that there was a threat, but because of the idea that they think that this is new.
But yeah, I mean, for one thing, I mean, that's not invisible text per se. That's just including this goes back to our garbage in, garbage out, or, manipulation in, manipulation out, if you want to put it
Right,
that way, of
right,
the way that you put the data in. It may not show to a human readable character, but the data is still there.
right, right. So when they use the word invisible, they just meant that we wouldn't notice. They didn't
Okay.
anticipate that
All right.
humans would notice. Again, though, for me personally, I thought to myself, well, how is that different from every other virus or worm that somebody double clicked on a cat picture that then ran through the rest of the network at their job? It really
Yeah,
isn't.
you're right. It is pretty much the same, right? It's
It's
how to
really
get
just
something in there that is meaningful to the machine, but not necessarily to the human,
exactly an instruction.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that would be the bad stuff, right?
Yeah. So one thing that I thought was interesting, and this goes back to a conversation we had, I think it was our last podcast here. Um, my gut feeling is that the way to win is to fight fire with fire. If you've got an AI chatbot that has the potential to stash stuff in Unicode characters that humans would never read or never notice, then you need an AI chatbot that's sitting on your email server or whatever, that's watching the information come in, that's checking for Unicode characters that contain, right? That's all it is.
It's filtering.
A big part of why I wanted to bring this up is I just wanted to say, not everything that's on the internet is true. While this may be true, and there may be something to it, I think that there's bigger threats for businesses to worry about. And I don't think that that's a reason, my personal opinion, that's no reason to not use it. So if anybody out there says to themselves, wait a minute, chatbots are going to start talking to each other and saying things that I can't understand. Yes, it's already happening. Continue to use ChatGPT and be successful with it. So, on the good news front.
Okay, good news. Let's go with that.
Good news right here at the end. Dario Amodei is the CEO of Anthropic. That's Claude. Interesting. He put out a manifesto. I think they called it an essay on his personal blog about a week ago now. And he started to change the vernacular a little bit. I think he did it on purpose. And there's a handful of things about what he said that I just want to touch on really fast. Number one, he changed the phrase AGI. So that's artificial general intelligence. That's when a lot of people who describe artificial general intelligence say that's the point in time when, the best of us, whoever the best of us is in a subject matter, AI can do it the same or better for all topics across all of humanity. A lot of people scoff at that. Dario thinks it's going to arrive here in the next year, which is earlier than a lot of the other prognosticators. Maybe he knows something we don't.
That's pretty early.
Yeah, it's pretty early. As the CEO of one of the largest LLMs that are out there, when he says something like that, it catches my attention. One of the interesting things about what he said was he redefined AGI. Nobody has a great definition for AGI. Everybody's kind of coming up with their own. But he redefined AGI and said, I'm not going to use AGI anymore. Instead, I'm just going to call it powerful AI, meaning it can actually perform a lot of the functions that we want it to make it useful in our lives. He talked about, he rejected the idea that AI development was a religious mission, or, there's some people out there who are prognosticating quite extensively on how these guys see themselves as, the salvation of humanity. None of that. He threw all that stuff out the window. The one thing that I'll leave you with, and this was actually really uplifting for me, was that, and nobody talked about this. I went through a couple different articles, and then I went and found his essay, and the title of the essay is what caught my attention. And I was so disappointed that in all of the other stuff that I had read, it didn't actually say this. But the title of his essay is Machines of Loving Grace, because that is how he sees the future of AI.
That's a very interesting title.
Yes, 100%, right? He sees it as multimodal, right? Being able to take information in a dozen different ways, being able to put information out in a dozen different ways. He sees it as helpful. It's not the Terminator. It's not the Matrix. There's none of that silliness. There's going to be a robot in your house that runs on AI here in a couple of years, and that they are machines of loving grace. And that told me what I needed to know about him.
Okay.
So, I also think that it was purposeful, just from a standpoint of, by redefining AGI as powerful AI, by calling them machines of loving grace, by changing the vernacular just a little bit. It changes the conversation a little bit. Instead of talking about power consumption and how it didn't do exactly what I wanted it to do, and whatever. It told me it couldn't read from that website. He's saying, no, 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 these things are possible. Look at it in a different light. I think that part of that is just to open some people up to the idea that, hey, wait, maybe I am looking at this wrong.
Yeah, it's more of a vision thing, right? As opposed
Yeah,
to, this is what the here and now, and let's go back to what a vision of what AI can do and how it can be useful.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the end of my topic list.
Okay, well, that's it for today then. Thanks
Sounds good.
always, Stephen. Thanks for those who watch.